Thank you for joining us. Our program will begin in 1 minute.
Heather Zinzak, the CMO here at Pluralsight. And we're hosting this event because Pluralsight is committed to creating space for these important conversations. We got a jam-packed event today with incredible individuals to educate and inspire all of us. So let's get going. One of these incredible individuals is our host for the day. Please join me in welcoming comedian, actor, author, musician, and activist, the amazing Amanda Seales.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning, everybody. Glad we could all be here together because, we're like away, but we're here. In this new normal that we're in, it doesn't change the fact that there are still things that we need to really focus on as we continue to grow and expand. And that is diversity, equality, and inclusion. And I think now more than ever, at least in my recent memory, we're seeing folks really awaken. I call it an eruption of consciousness, awaken to the reality and necessity for really applying those things in more than just conversation, but in actuality, and really understanding the difference between what diversity, equality, and inclusion are so that they can very practically be applied and understood as responsibilities for all of us, especially those of us who are in the corporate space, and understanding that we are in a nation that never built a corporate space that cared about any of those things. And so it's important that we activate all of our minds and consciousness around those efforts in real applicable ways. So thank you to Thrive for creating a situation and a scenario and a space where we can talk about how we can do that and how we can make diversity, equality, and inclusion thrive in a real way. So let's dive in. I'm honored to have the pleasure of introducing our two incredible keynote speakers, Bonita Stewart and Jackie Adams. Those are names that just let you know they about it. Those are very solid names. And I would like to invite Bonita to join me on our virtual stage. Bonita is the Vice President of Global Partnerships at Google, where she oversees some of the largest U.S. publishers across media and entertainment, news, publishing, mobile apps, search, and commerce. She is widely hailed for her astute leadership. I need to take a mentorship class from you, Bonita, and also pioneered the concept of Howard West, a computer science immersion program for historically Black colleges and universities powered by Google. Welcome, Bonita. And I'd also like to invite Jackie Adams to also join us to our virtual stage. Now, Jackie spent more than 2 decades as an Emmy Award-winning CBS News correspondent, covering the groundbreaking campaigns of Jesse Jackson for president and Geraldine Ferraro for vice president, before she spent 5 years as a White House correspondent during the Reagan and Bush administrations. Jackie is a graduate of the Harvard Business School. Okay. Serves on the board of directors of the Harvard Business School Club of New York. All right. And is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Bonita and Jackie have recently co-authored, yes, sisters coming together, a new book titled A Blessing, Women of Color Teaming Up to Lead, Empower, and Thrive, which I'm excited to share will be released next month on October 15th. Welcome, ladies. We're all thrilled to have you both here today. And without further ado, our virtual stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Heather and Amanda, for that warm welcome. We're so excited to be here with the Pluralsight team and the many guests joining us virtually. We applaud your vision to democratize technology skills for everyone, particularly those within the underrepresented groups. We wholeheartedly agree with your vision and, more importantly, your approach, which has been validated by numerous research reports, including ours. We're honored by today's opportunity to discuss our new book. The title, A Blessing, requires a bit of explanation. In our careers, we have often been the only person, the only woman of color in a room. We have been first. I was the first African-American female vice president at Google, and Jackie was the first African-American female correspondent whom CBS News assigned full-time to the White House. Given that we were first, we have often been considered unicorns, those rare and valuable beings. Like a flock of geese, a group of unicorns is called a blessing, and so we are. You're probably asking, why write this book now? Despite the social and racial injustice we witnessed this summer, we started our project in 2018. In fact, Jackie and I knew each other as fellow Harvard Business School alumni, and we respected each other's professional accomplishments. Though we had a vision to actually change the narrative for women of color. We wanted to create a substantive and scalable rallying cry around the notion of teaming up. As business professionals from tech and media, it seemed natural for us to team up and create a new mission-driven venture.
Yes, Bonita, I want to add to your thanks to Heather and Amanda. This is such an exciting day. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to discuss our work before such an accomplished and large audience. Now, for the bulk of my career, I've been immersed in the worlds of national politics and foreign policy and the arts, but I've been excited to learn more about the technology world through my partnership with Bonita. We felt that our book should be more than just a memoir. In fact, it is a mission-driven legacy project. We've crafted a thesis, we've grounded it in data, and we've illuminated it with anecdotal examples. I have a friend who's a highly respected pollster, and last November we used his firm, it's called Quadrant Strategies, to survey 4,005 American women, so-called desk workers. They're across 4 races, Black, Latinx, Asian, and white, and 4 generations, Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, and Boomers. We will be sharing some of our new and perhaps unexpected results with you. However, at the start, we want to stress that if you remember only 4 things from this presentation, they are, number 1, hire us. Hire brilliant, ambitious women of color and hire us in multiples. No more one and done. Number 2, become an inclusive leader. And we will be providing you with very specific tips to that end. Allyship can come from any direction. We must all stand up for one another. And again, we have some specific ideas for doing this. And finally, number 4, team up. This is our anthem, especially for people of color.
And while the title of our book addresses women of color, A Blessing is for everyone, particularly leaders who are interested in activating their competitive advantage that will come from winning the race for talent. And this is also for future leaders, those of you in the audience, the younger people who want to be prepared to actually embrace the changing dynamics of management that we're seeing today. As Jackie mentioned, we are going to discuss several major themes from the book. So let's get started with generational diversity, which we believe is critical to our messages of hire us and allyship. We've actually coined this phrase to highlight what we're seeing as the nuances that are being overlooked in today's diversity and inclusion conversations. In fact, you may not know this, but the demographics of the US are changing. By 2027, people of color ages 18 to 29, that's our Gen Z and millennials, will be in the majority according to the census. So this will be a significant tipping point that will start to shape the future of the US as well as our global economy. In fact, in some cities like New York City and in states like California, people of color are already in the majority. And with worker mobility changing, we're seeing that now as we're all in the Zoom era, we will see companies start to open and expand locations to attract more diverse talent. And we all know the most important investment you will make are the people within your company. So from our research, we have found these Gen Z and millennial workers are mission driven. They are quite innovative. They are extremely confident. And yet they are demanding the workplaces that provide the support they need to thrive. Yet in many cases, they are the only. So let's show this first slide. For example, 47% of Black women, and that's almost half, told us that they are frequently or always the only person of their race in professional situations. By contrast, 73% of white women are rarely the only person of their race in such a setting. So to attract and, more importantly, to retain workers of color, we believe business leaders need to approach talent with a desire to hire in multiples versus hiring for tokenism or the classic, I've hired one and I'm done.
Right, Bonita. And just as this era of tokenism is or should be over, you should know that old typical ways of dealing with staffers are over too. Developing inclusive leaders and fostering allyship are key components of creating this environment of belonging. Let's take a look at our second slide. When we surveyed all generations, it was eye-opening to know that across the board within the youngest women, Generation Z, 92% of Black women, 93% Latinx, 96% of Asian, and 95% of white said that they feel that guidance from managers and supervisors will be helpful to their making progress at work. Now, despite the traumas of this summer, people of color, and especially women of color, are in fact winning across every industry in small and large ways, from politics and law to sports to ballet. Even the 4 currently reigning beauty queens are all women of color. We are highly educated and continue to make strides. Census data says that more Black women are earning college degrees than any other slice of the US population. Women of color control more than $1 trillion in consumer spending power. We have a hunger for entrepreneurship. American Express did a study that found that women-owned businesses grew by 58% from 2007 to 2018, but firms owned by Black women grew at an astounding 164%. And Black women have this explosive growth in entrepreneurship despite receiving no dollars in venture capital on average, according to McKinsey research. Now, our research, Bonita's and my research, also showed that younger women, the Gen Z women, want a supportive work environment, a sense of belonging, as we've said, a connection with supervisors, but they also want a connection with the sisterhood. Can we look at the next slide? 92% of Black women and 90% of Latinx women felt that sisterhood would be important to them at work. And interestingly, the percentages were smaller with the other two groups. Only 84% of white women and 83% of Asian women felt the same way about this important notion of sisterhood.
Also, in preparation for writing our book, as you can tell, we read through piles of significant research, but we did find 6 traits that best encapsulate an actionable way forward for inclusive leaders. Let's all be clear. We are on different levels of our leadership journey. However, this next phase of leadership will be a talent differentiator, and it will be a differentiator for every brand, every company, and every board. The complexity of leadership, we believe, is going to move from this understanding. I think we all started with IQ. Then we moved to EQ, which was emotional intelligence. But now we are in an environment of leadership which is around CQ, which is cultural intelligence.
Well, I have to interrupt here because maybe we have a new component. Maybe it's BQ, a Bonita quotient, because after almost 2 years of working together closely, I've learned that a major key to success is asking yourself, what would Bonita do?
And so you can see Jackie and I, we've had such an incredible partnership. So as we looked at many of this data, we thought it would be valuable to share this research from Deloitte. So if we could show this next slide, you'll see that these traits are actionable. And for the leaders in the audience, we know it's super important that you have a checklist, and this is an excellent one. We also can provide the link to this research in the chat box. The first one is commitment, and this is where it starts. It's driven by values. Do you have a deep-seated sense of fairness? It's really how you show up. And second is courage. Don't be afraid to challenge entrenched organizational attitudes. Make sure you're displaying humility. Acknowledge your own personal limitations, but then seek input from others to overcome them. If you see something, say something, do something. The third is cognizance of bias. We know checks and balances can prevent organizational biases from stifling any diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. But unconscious bias training, which is really in full force across many of the companies, it's really not one and done. It's not something that you should do once. It should be ever present. And that comes through curiosity. Ask respectful questions, engage with active listening, make people feel valued, respected, and represented. And fifth, which we talked about, the CQ, cultural intelligence. Show you value different cultural backgrounds. And lastly, for those within the technology, we know collaboration is important, but this is ensuring that all, and I say all individuals, not just some, feel empowered to express their opinions. The diversity of thinking, as we know, is absolutely critical to effective collaboration. And so since many of in the audience are from the technology field, I thought I would share just a few specific lessons that I have learned from being a leader of color in tech. And in many respects, as a member of an underrepresented group, you must recognize that in many tech situations, you're playing a pioneer. You have to own it. You have to bring your best self. We also found in our research that women of color are usually the first to know, especially, in the younger generations when it comes to technology. So this is actually a time to embrace women of color into centers of power. Why not create a sense of FOMO among others who are missing out on the excellence, creative ideas, and groundbreaking innovation that really sets diverse teams apart? I was fortunate when Google bet on me to lead large teams across multiple industries over the past 14 years. I encourage every single one of you, look to the left, look to the right in your virtual room. I encourage you to bet on someone. And today, that's where I spend my time. I'm working with other leaders to share the joy of allyship and demonstrating through my actions the business imperative of having a diverse team. And while I'm confident and feel I belong, I recognize that others in tech may not feel this way. And that is why we're writing this book. Jackie and I want to encourage leaders to hire us, to nurture us with stretch assignments, and reap the full ROI from talent. I saw a recent LinkedIn post, and this one really caught my eye. It said, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being invited to the dance, but belonging is dancing like no one's watching. So we want everyone to dance.
Yes, allies and inclusive leaders have to dance in all directions, from top to bottom and back again, across teams, within teams. Now, granted, most of you in the tech world have probably focused on building your cognitive skills, but we want to suggest that you also develop some other skills, some non-cognitive skills. In our first chapter, we cite some of these non-cognitive skills that are also called character education traits. And these traits are, in fact, significant predictors of success in life, as well as on standardized tests. Now, I first encountered these concepts when I served on the board of the KIPP charter schools here in New York City. Can we look at the next slide? In fact, there are 23 of these character traits, all of which KIPP has proven can be taught and measured. And KIPP focuses on just 8, which you can see on the slide. But so as to speed through the list, I want to stress just 2. And these 2 track with those that Bonita just mentioned. Curiosity. Bonita described it as asking respectful questions and active listening. And then there's also social intelligence or cultural intelligence. It's an awareness of us, a certain cultural humility and modesty. Clearly, there's the opportunity for tremendous power here, opportunities for greater allyship if everyone practices and lives the same traits. Now, just as Bonita stressed some of the lessons that she has learned in your technology field, I want to share a major lesson that I have learned. My very first conscious memory is of my father saying, when you're Black in America, you have to be superior just to be equal. I'm sure many of you heard similar things from your parents, but that recognition fueled my quest for excellence in education in every sphere I entered. And I considered this feeling of superiority, even if I'm the only person who sees it, as my superpower, my source of confidence. Now, in our survey, many Latinx women described their superpower as their ability to live in 2 worlds, 2 cultures, their knowledge of 2 languages. And sadly, very sadly, many of the Asian women told us that people are more skeptical of their abilities and their intelligence because of their gender and race. But hear me, the truth is that all of us, every single person, has superpowers. What are yours? What are your superpowers? Ask yourself and then own these powers. Be proud of them. They are so very, very real. And one other bit of warning, don't beat up on yourselves. I've learned that life and careers are very, very long if you're lucky. You don't have to be everything right now.
Yes, and as Jackie said, careers can be long, and we know we need allies as part of that. In our chapter 5, we talk about dreaming of allies, and we cite the desire for underrepresented minorities to excel with a little help from their managers and colleagues. We've even crafted a letter to our white male allies. We urge them to actually veer from their comfort zones, to know that brilliance can come in different skin tones and hairstyles. We cite 8 actions that allies can take. We've talked about inclusive leadership, but everyone can be an ally. So if we go to this last slide, we're saying don't be afraid to ask questions, and this is really on both sides. You need to pay attention who's engaged and who is not, especially in this Zoom environment. Listen better. Offer praise for those that are around you. Look for potential, not perfection, and then recognize you must become comfortable being uncomfortable. And we need hiring managers to take off their blinders, to look beyond the Ivy League and traditional sources of talent. Be humble, courageous, and stop looking for people just like yourself to find these superheroes. Hiring managers should know that talent really is the new frontier. Just like technology, we know what it means to have intellectual property. So those who look widely for people, like those of you that are in this session today, are going to be the winners. All of us can be better at knowing that bias is real, but we can all ask the question, why? And so at the end of the day, allies should just come out of their respective corners and just get started.
And we just have a couple of closing thoughts here, especially in this era of the twin COVID-19 and systemic racism pandemics. Now, more than ever, people of color need to blow away what has been called a poisonous fog of inferiority. It's a fog that's been imposed on us by oppressors for the last 400 years. It's a poisonous fog that's been imposed on women too, but just blow it away. The truth is no one is inferior. It's just a fog. It's just a myth. We all have the capacity to be brilliant, to identify and exercise these superpowers that we've been talking about. We need to embrace our mental health and thrive. And once we are in a confident mindset, we can jettison the weight of the imposter syndrome. We discussed this subject specifically in our chapter 4. It's called Never Give Up. And the message is just that simple. Never give up. You all have the intellectual capabilities that you need. You all belong. You have earned your seat at the table. You do have superpowers. And once we all team up, once we all begin working together from this position of confidence and strength, we are an unstoppable force.
And my paternal grandfather was a very wise man. Almost 100 years ago, he wrote that the future progress of the race depends on education and unity. We are indeed, as Jackie said, making tremendous strides in education. Next up, unity. For me, for us, that means teaming up across our community and with our allies. No one should go on this journey alone. There is an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So let's go together and team up. We thank you for having us at your summit today.
Thank you.
Thank you all for such an incredible dialogue and all of this incredible insight. You know, I think that was probably the most cordial read of this industry that I have ever heard, because I want you all to know that that was a lot of realness that was coming at you through that camera in a very cordial, polite manner. But I hope they got you together, because the truth of the matter is everything that you're saying, it doesn't exist just in tech. I know for me in Hollywood, you know, it's the same trend, and you still find yourself having the same conversations around really just wanting folks to be willing to open up their minds and their spaces to understanding that, you know, in reference to tech, that you can get talent from all different areas, and there doesn't have to just be a relatability in order for there to be a viability, right? And so I really appreciate that message, and I hope that everyone really took that in. So thank you, Bonita. Thank you, Jackie. We appreciate you. Keep thriving and telling us how to thrive. All right. All right. At this point, I would like to launch our diversity, equality, and inclusion panel. First up to join me on our virtual stage for this discussion is Alice Meredith. Alice is a Pluralsight author, senior HR professional, and culture strategist. She's passionately committed to her work of helping leaders build diverse and inclusive environments where all individuals and groups are free from prejudice. Welcome, Alice. I love the purple. Next, I would like to introduce everyone to Brixton Diamond. Brixton is the CEO of Big Answers, which is an entity that consults on diversity and inclusion strategy for clients across entertainment, technology, and asset management. He served as and asset management, generating new partnerships and leveraging impactful connections. He previously served as COO of the Executive Leadership Council, which is the preeminent member organization of Black executives in the Fortune 1000. And he is a founding board member and chair of the Black House Foundation, which provides pathways for Black multi-platform content creators into career opportunities within film, television, digital, and emerging platforms. Welcome, Brixton. How you doing? And last but certainly not least, I'd like to invite our final panelist, Chaz Bono, to join us on our virtual stage. Chaz is an actor and acclaimed author and has shared his life and experiences in and produced the 3-time Emmy-nominated documentary, Becoming Chaz. He has a rich history of advocating for LGBTQA rights and is a passionate champion of equality for all individuals. Welcome, Chaz.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So thanks, everyone, for joining me today. Let's dig into our topic of inclusion as a differentiator. So Bonita and Jackie just discussed how allyship can come from any direction. So considering that each of us is an advocate for inclusion, I'd like to ask each of you to share a personal experience that has greatly influenced your perspective on diversity or allyship that motivated you to become an advocate. And we'll begin with Alice.
I am happy to share. I feel like I'm a little bit dark. The clouds came over the windows, but I'm happy to share, Amanda. First of all, I just have to say your phrase of eruption of consciousness, I am going to be repeating that over and over. I love that. I hope I can borrow that.
Make sure you give me credit.
I will. So my passion for workplace equality started in the 1990s when I was one of a few female directors in a Fortune 500 company. Back then, especially, I saw and felt firsthand what gender bias looks and feels like. My career transitioned into HR, and this space then allowed me opportunities to help support and fight for others who were feeling the pain of discrimination and prejudice in the workplace. But if I had to say my key life experience, took place about 10 years ago. My husband and I adopted a sibling group of 4 Hispanic boys into our family. Our eyes were opened as to how much more work is needed in this space of equality for everyone, as we saw firsthand some of the pain our boys experienced living as minorities. Then that day happened. I was sitting at a high school wrestling match. My son was wrestling, my teenage son, and right behind me, a man stood up and yelled, "Don't let that," fill in the blank of the most horrific word, right, that you can imagine, "beat you, boy." And the mama bear me came alive. As I stood up, went head to head with this large man. I walked away from that experience, along with my own experiences and my work in HR, vowing to do whatever I can to make a difference. So fairness and equality and acceptance of difference can be shown and felt by everyone.
Thank you, Alice, for sharing. Brixton?
Thank you for having Pluralsight, and Amanda, good to be with you again. We're usually in the snow and at Sundance, and good to not be in snow. My experience comes from growing up in Atlanta, as Killer Mike has described it as Wakanda, where Black folks were mayor and police chief and president of city council, and I knew all their kids. So I really grew up in this world where Black folks were in power. And so I didn't go to an integrated high school, when I use that word. I didn't go to schools that were integrated until high school. And so I came to that experience with a lot of power and agency and understanding of what it meant to be a Black man in Atlanta, which was super different from what it meant to be a Black man in America. And Southwest Atlanta, SWATs, was even different from Buckhead, if you know the terrain. But that power and that specificity around who gets to make decisions and be in control has really carried me forward in terms of understanding what's wrong with America and what beauty there can be if you give people full agency and opportunity to set their own destiny. So as I moved through my very well mixed high school, which was 40% Black, 40% white, and 20% other, and we were telling the other, because it's Atlanta in the 80s, you got to choose. I really got a sense of the need to be an advocate, not just for myself and for my own people, but for other communities. And that carried me through from Atlanta to Providence for college, and LA for career, and Hollywood ultimately, and finance, and all sorts of spaces where folks who look like me just don't necessarily have voice. And so the world is less rich and less successful and less fly because we don't have agency, voice, and power. And I'm on a mission to change that.
And less fly, yes. Chaz, would you mind sharing your story with us?
Sure. So for me, I guess it also kind of goes back a long time ago when I first heard about and kind of came out the first time before I realized I was transgender. I came out as lesbian in the early 90s. And when I first found out that there was no federal protection for gays and lesbians in the workplace, it just seemed shocking to me at that time. And so I got an opportunity to work with the Human Rights Campaign and to go to Washington, D.C. As a bunch of relatives of sitting House members for the reintroduction at that time of the Non-Discrimination Act. And, we just had this huge victory in the Supreme Court where we finally do have, protection federally in the workplace, which was pretty amazing. But that was kind of what started me on the road to activism. And then I think as you realize that, you're an individual that isn't afforded the same rights as other people in this country, you then realize that there are others like you. And that, there's a lot of unfairness. So that's kind of what, made me aware of being an ally, for others, not just for my community, which I have, worked for and fought for the last, I don't know, like 25 years. But I became aware that if all of us came together, that we would be a huge force of strength. And how awesome that would be.
Well, Chaz, you've worked in organizations and with organizations like GLAAD, yep, who is actually celebrating their annual Bi Week right now. And Bi Week is for allies and Bi Plus people who, Bi Week is for allies and Bi Plus people who to learn about history and the culture and community and current policy priorities of Bi Plus communities. So in the spirit of allyship, being an ally means you stand up for marginalized people, especially when it's hard behind closed doors. Because that's the thing. You can do it when everyone's watching you a lot of times, but when no one's watching you, it's like, do you still keep the same energy? That's allyship. And Chaz, you have an incredible platform to help others learn from you and your experiences. What specific advice do you have for our audience to be better allies for the LGBTQ or gender nonconforming individuals and their community?
Well, I think if I talk specifically about transgender and gender nonconforming people, I think information. There's still, unlike I think the LGB part of the acronym, they've come a long way. Still a ways to go, but also easy to understand, right? I mean, we all feel feelings of attraction, so it's easy to understand, sexual orientation, and that your sexual orientation, somebody else's, might just be different than yours. Now, gender identity is something that's a little trickier to understand, and a lot of people just don't. And so being educated is, I think, to be just an ally for the transgender community. And I'm just going to say that in the broadest, most inclusive sense, so I don't have to break it down, including, non-binary individuals and all sense of the transgender community. It takes I think a little bit more work to really understand and to educate yourself into what it really means and how gender identity is different from sexual orientation, how gender identity is different from gender, how, for most people, your gender identity and your gender are the same, but for trans people, they don't align. And also this kind of bias that we've seen in the media for so long. A great film came out earlier this year on Netflix called Disclosure. I highly recommend it to people, especially people who want to be allies, because it really breaks down this kind of bias that the media has portrayed about transgender people. Kind of almost, that we are not who we say we are, that we are, kind of trying to hoodwink, dupe exactly people. And this message has kind of been reinforced over and over. And it's I'm in the film, and a ton of different trans actors and activists are in it, and I learned a lot watching it. and films that at the time when they came out, I thought were beautiful or groundbreaking or whatever, I was able to look at in a different light, and really see, oh my God, no, that was damaging. That reinforced really bad stereotypes. So yeah, I'm going to say that. I'm going to say just, try to educate, try to understand, try to, there's a lot of information on the internet. There's this film Disclosure is great. There's lots of other films, and try to understand, us, and I think that will make it much easier to then go out and advocate and be an ally. If you don't know, personally somebody who's transgender in your life, which still, the evidence shows that so many people still don't. And the other thing I'll say, just because we're right around the corner, is that you can do as an ally right now is vote.
That's right. Vote. Specifically vote for the better one. So
That's right.
I'll just say that. So Brixton, a study by McKinsey, found that companies in the top quartile for ethnic and cultural diversity on executive teams were 33% more likely to have industry-leading profitability. As CEO of Big Answers, you help executives widen their vision to uncover talent and advance opportunities for those who should have it, but do not. In your recommendation, what are some basic steps organizations can take to create a more diverse and inclusive workplace, especially at the leadership level?
And Amanda, that's where our work focuses at Big Answers, is at the leadership level. Because I think, and we believe that you got to start from the top, right? You've got to have folks in control, in seats of power, that can not just make decisions and contributions to the organization, but also model the behavior that you want people at the lower levels to understand, right? Mm-hmm. So that means your board, first of all. There's a great, I like Instagram, so we're going to get a lot of Instagram references in here. There's a great Instagram page, Show the Boardroom, right? And it shows the boardrooms and C-suites, executive levels of major companies and institutions across this country. And there have been great statements of support for Black Lives Matter and great big checks written. But when you put the proof in front of who's sitting in the rooms of power, it shows. And it shows in terms of bad decisions on advertising or on product placement or on locations. And so being able to have someone at the senior level who can really advocate for communities that you serve, but also communities that you don't access yet, is critically important. So that just quickly is not just easy to do, because we have relationship bias and network bias in all of our lives. So the people I know are going to be, if I look pre-high school, look just like me. People in my cul-de-sac are just like me. But once I go a little bit beyond that to the other side of town, I get a broader network. Once I go out of the South to New England and to California, I have this broader world that I can encompass. So we advise CEOs and decision makers to think about, how do you get outside of your immediate network to find talent at the senior level? Pipeline is wonderful, entry level is incredible, but if you have a glass ceiling that holds people back, or specifically a bamboo ceiling that holds back API, Asian Pacific Islander leaders, you've got a problem. And you can really compensate for that and fix for that by making sure that you bring people into the top who really drive culture, who really drive results, and really drive priorities.
I've never heard the term bamboo ceiling.
Yes, and so I'll elaborate. So even in tech, you see lots of places where you have lots of Asian Pacific Islanders, and with some notable exceptions, the move from rank and file level to C-suite and executive level is quite rare. Indian populations are different, but in terms of particularly even Chinese Americans, and again, let's think about American historically underrepresented group, not foreign nationals, but think about in your own organization, how many Chinese Americans or Korean Americans or Filipinos, really nuanced, are at senior levels of your organization. And that's where there tend to be some blocks and some really significant limits in terms of representation and opportunity, even amongst the group that seems to be most readily pointed to as a place where there isn't a challenge.
Do you mean the group that's considered to be thriving? See what I did there?
See what I saw it.
Yeah,
I saw it.
Got it.
Yes.
So Alice, you recently hosted an event with Women in Technology International on understanding and counteracting conscious and unconscious bias. What is the most powerful? I just want to say that unconscious bias is a doozy, ain't it? Ain't it? Because I have a lecture called the Side-Eye Seminar, Identifying and Defying Everyday Forms of Sexism. And there's so many that are so ingrained, so many biases that are just in the thread and tapestry of our everyday life that we just don't even know. And we don't even know that we are actually increasing the pervasiveness in our ignorance. And so I love that, you make a point of pointing that out. What is the most powerful thing that leaders can do to help counteract the bias we all have? And let me just add that they have as well, right?
Absolutely.
Because the leaders also have the bias too. And ensure team members are respected and valued for their unique differences.
So Amanda, you already touched on it. To me, my opinion, the number one most powerful thing leaders can do is to go on their own journey of learning to become a more inclusive individual themselves, right? And we do that exactly like you said, by recognizing and owning our own hidden biases. Both Bonita and Jacqueline talked to the power of exploring and discovering our biases. All humans have them. It fuels my emotions when I hear someone say, I'm not biased. I want to be like, yes, you are, right? Things our parents said, our grandparents said, movies watched, books read during our childhood years. So many things influence how we think and feel about others. The cool thing, though, about going on this journey of exploring our own biases is once we recognize and then own them, right? Because the owning's that tough part, right? Once we recognize and own them, that starts the process of overcoming them. So we got to take that first step. And I think Bonita said it. She said, I wrote it down. Exploring our bias is not a one and done deal, right? It is a lifelong journey. So the number one thing leaders can do is to go on their own journey, becoming more inclusive. And then how do I help my environments, the places where I work, show up, right? To be more respecting and valuing and appreciating differences of everyone is to ensure the highest level executive leader owns it. It is not a diversity and inclusion program that with events to launch the work. If we want to create a culture of inclusion, it has to be intertwined into every pillar of the organization and led. It can be supported by different departments, but led by the highest level executive, and then all leaders embrace that.
There you have it. Brixen, in your experience, what pitfalls should organizations try to avoid when building a diversity and inclusion program?
So I think Alice touched on it really well. One of my friends says that the chief diversity officer is the CEO. That's number one, right? That is number one. Number two is just thinking it's going to go a lot faster than it is, right? So I think a lot of folks and a lot of companies come at this and say, all right, we'll give this a quarter. We'll solve a problem. We'll get at a solution, and then it's done. It is not going to be done in a quarter. It's not going to be done in a year. I'll go back to it. It's taken us 400 years since the first enslaved person arrived on these shores to create this problem. You're not going to solve it in a very short period of time. So I think the biggest pitfall is thinking that you are going to be able to get after this and get some solutions and write a check and a statement, and even look at hiring, performance review, pay, and promotion in your organization and solve it. You have to look at all of those things very carefully and in an anti-racist framework. But even if you do all that, here is the bad news. It will not go quickly. And you have to have stamina and be dedicated to this fight and this discussion and this self-examination, which is super uncomfortable, for the long haul.
The long haul, it ain't gonna end in a day. And I think that stamina gets built with support, right? And the understanding that this is not a thing that's being done as punishment. These things are being implemented as points of liberation for everybody. And I think a lot of folks don't recognize that often.
And the sooner you face it, the more readily you can get on the path to reconciliation. I think about South Africa and the miracle of reconciliation in South Africa. And that is, again, a miraculous moment and a movement and a process and a reality that takes continuous atonement and attention even today. And you're gonna make mistakes, right? So to that support that Amanda talks about, you have to have support, because people know who you are. So when you do stuff, they know who you are. If you're worth standing up for, they will stand up for you. If you're trash, they'll let you go.
These is facts. So, panel, the global conversation around social justice has clearly been elevated in the past 6 months, as we discussed, an eruption of consciousness. What about this movement brings you hope? And what are you concerned will get missed? And we can start with Chaz.
Well, God, I mean, there's so much to be hopeful about. It just seems like for the first time, we've seen everybody becoming aware of especially the systemic racism that exists in our country. And, that has been amazing. I think what scares me or I'm sorry, what was there was what gives me hope and the other part. I
think will be overlooked. What concerns?
Yeah, what concerns me is just that I feel like we're at a point in this country where, there's a tremendous, opportunity and sense of optimism. And then there's a small percentage of people that I feel like are fighting so hard against the progress that most of us want to move forward. And that is really a scary thing right now.
Can I ask what makes you say it's a small percentage?
I don't think it's the majority of Americans. So it's not a small percentage. I think it's probably about 60-40. No, I mean,
you're right. Because my internet tells me different. So I hope you're right.
Does it? Okay. I mean, that's my sense of it. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's my sense is that I feel like the majority of people want to move forward, but that there is a what?
A sect.
A sect, exactly. A sect that very much wants to go back, wants to move backwards, wants to go to a time, before inclusivity and before we acknowledged, that diversity was a positive thing in this country. And that is something that scares me very much.
Me as well. Alice, your hopes, your concerns.
What brings me hope is the conversations taking place at the dinner table with the younger elementary kids. With the news and the media and the uproar, it is awesome to have these opportunities to educate, teach, and talk about the next generation who is coming up on deck to really make a change. I spend time talking with my grandkids about racism and equality for all and opportunity for all. I mean, power in those conversations compared to chatting about the latest Avengers movie, right? So that is what brings me hope. My worry is similar to Chaz's in the scope of the work is so huge from the global human perspective. And to really make a difference, we have to come together aligned and committed. And it's that aligned, right? To make a movement, to make progress, we need to be aligned in the work. So that's what worries me, is how we can bring all of that alive.
So what you're saying is we need to become the Avengers.
Love it. Yes, love it.
Kristen, bring us home.
I'll bring you home. So, I am so heartened by the global nature of this movement. So I can't tell you the times in my career, particularly at the Executive Leadership Council, where we go to Canada or France or the UK, and they say, we don't have the problems you have in the US. And I would retort, well, bring me all your Black executives to this event. They're like, well, we don't have those. So no matter what the source of your issue, and if you were a colonizing country or a colonized country, you've got these issues. I could go on. So I'm heartened to see the movement in the UK and France and in all corners of the world talking about this in such a central way. But then to my worries, I already talked about stamina, but I think it's a personal issue, right? I'm gonna go back to Instagram, back to the gram. There's a great handle, Saved by the Bell Hooks, which is basically Saved by the Bell, images with bell hooks quotes over them. And my favorite from this week was, no male successfully measures up to patriarchal standards without engaging in an ongoing practice of self-betrayal.
That's it.
And so I think there's so many costs and so many prices we each pay to be a part of the majority, which is a fallacy, right? And so I think the stamina and the courage to face our own differences, no matter who we are, trans, cisgender, straight, white, male, just the ability and stamina to sort of resist the patriarchy and the majority and the massive cost and price we have to pay to be a part of it. I just worry about our ability to stand up to that initially and over time.
All of these so valid and so insightful. And I thank you all for being so honest from your unique perspectives and point of views. And, as we all are watching in our own unique perspectives and point of views, it becomes so important to be able to listen and apply and understand the difference between the work we have to do as individuals and the work we have to do for our communities. And sometimes our individual ideals, have to take a step back in order for us to make better decisions for our communities and for the group. And, that's how we avenge, because I feel like there is a Thanos. Like when we talk about all of you all's concerns, that feels like different Infinity Stones. So I'm just like, for all intents and purposes, these types of conversations can at the very least spark consciousness and invite us into different perspectives that can bring us into different spaces of hope. And I always say hope is a sea upon which you can float to higher ground. So thank you all for joining us. I appreciate all of you all's insight, and I continue to do the work that you are doing, and we will continue to support you in all of the spaces that you are doing and all the work you're doing to create better spaces and safe spaces. So stay safe and stay strong and vote for the right person. Thanks. All right. So we are going to bring Heather back on to the screen. Hey, Heather.
Hey, Amanda. What an amazing panel, like so inspiring. And it gave me hope. So just to hear all of their stories and the work that each of them are doing. So just fantastic panel. And yeah. I thought that we would start today, I personally am a huge fan and, just have watched your work and everything that you've done. And I know I would love to learn more about you. And I know that the folks out there in the audience watching would love to learn more about you as well. So I thought we could take a few minutes to get to know you a bit better, if that works for you.
Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so one thing you may, just on a personal note, one thing you may or may not, obviously don't know about me because we've just met, but my first job out of college was a developer. I coded software. And I never would have guessed I would have ended up not only moving into marketing, but loving it. And my personal journey took a ton of crazy twists and turns. You have accomplished so many things in your career, and there's been lots of twists. You have a master's from Columbia. You've been a spoken word poet, a game show creator, an award-winning actor, a best-selling author, and more. So I'd love for you to share with us what's been one of the biggest surprises for you so far, a twist that you didn't anticipate in your journey, and how did you navigate that?
Well, I had no intention of becoming a comedian. That was never, like, I've always been a huge comedy fan, from, sitcoms to stand-up to Saturday Night Live. I mean, I used to carry around Jerry Seinfeld's book, Sign Language, like it was the Old Testament. I mean, that was in my book bag. Like, I have a tattered copy, I know his bits by heart. And so, but being a comedian always felt like such a very big responsibility. And it felt like something that was like this like sacred space that I could not like step in very casually. And I found myself kind of wavering around 30, 31. And I guess I was going through my Saturn returns for all my astrology folks. In my just understanding of what my purpose was. And like, I had accomplished quite a few things at that point. I had been a VJ on MTV. I had gotten my master's from Columbia. I had done Def Poetry Jam. I had released albums. I had, really kind of explored the gamut of hosting and performing. So it was kind of like, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing now, because what ended up happening by me exploring was people said, we don't know what you do. You do so many things. We don't know what you do. It's like you do nothing. And I was like, I don't know how doing so many things translates into doing nothing. But I started to look at the careers of individuals who had what I decided that I wanted for myself, which was a multimedia moguldom based on my own point of view. And I did basically like a case study of folks like Chris Rock, Chelsea Handler, Ellen. And these were all people who weren't like me in terms of like our voice, our politics, et cetera, but they had built their whole livelihood on just their point of view. Mm-hmm. And then I looked at the one thing they all did that I didn't do, and it was stand up. And when I figured out that skeleton key, I was like, damn it. You got to do stand up, and you got to be like really good at it. And I just kind of put that out into the universe, and it came back to me. And one day this girl just emailed me and was like, hey, we're doing a stand-up show for Black comics. We'd love to have you. She thought I was a stand-up because she saw me on VH1 doing shows in context with other stand-ups. And I just was like, well, I guess this is the one. And I did really well the show, and I just ended up keeping going. And it turns out that comedy ended up being my home and my tribe. And it ended up being the thread that brought all of those things together that people said they couldn't figure out, that were so disparate. It became, now those were like common necessities as a comic. Oh, you write, right? You host, right? You perform, right? And it's like, yes. Whereas before it was like, I think you like write, you host, you perform. I don't know how these all come together. Well, now they all come together in humor.
Well, and I think, one thing I love about that story is that it's relatable for us. I mean, I know I personally can't relate to stand-up comedy. My sons would tell you that I'm not funny at all. But for the comedy I try to put on at home. But I think the one thing that's relatable for everybody is we've all had something in our lives that we've thought, could I do that? Could I be good at that? And I think, unfortunately, as a woman, sometimes I think women in general don't take that risk. They don't think, yeah, of course I can do that. Like, why wouldn't I be able to? And so I love that your story, that you're such an inspiration to say, hey, this was the next thing. And even though it wasn't what I started out on, I knew that I could do it. When somebody called and said, will you be a part of this? You're like, yeah, I can do that. Like, I think all of us need to take a dose of that, and it'd be a much better world, to be honest with you. So,
it scares me how backward we're going in that space due to technology, right? Like, it scares me how, technology and social media is training us inadvertently and sometimes, intentionally, to be less dependent on ourselves, and to because the fear of looking like you failed, or the fear of looking like you're flailing in front of such a vast worldwide web of an audience, makes folks, I think in a lot of cases, feel like, I'm safer just not, I'm safer not speaking, I'm safer not attempting, etc. And we have to really make concerted efforts individually to get our analog living more in balance with our digital discussions.
No, you're dead on. It's interesting because we have some young people who are joining today, and I have 3 kids at home. The oldest is a teenager, and I think there's a whole new level of fear of failure with the upcoming generation, because your failures are so much more public. Mm-hmm. So many more people are watching. And I think the best thing in the world is to not be afraid to fail and to go out and try something new. But you're right, in today's technology environment and with social media, failures have higher stakes. So that's I hadn't thought about that, but it's a really interesting perspective. One of the reasons I was really excited for this conversation is, I've always been so impressed with how you brought authenticity and your true voice to everything you do, even in some situations, I'm sure, where it was tough. And for those of us in the audience that have struggled at times to find our voice to be heard, can you share a time either that you're particularly proud of, that your voice was heard, or a time that was difficult? And what advice would you give to those of us that are trying to follow in your authentic path?
I literally just recorded our next week's episode of my podcast, Small Doses. And every episode is side effects of, and we did side effects of being outspoken. I think for a lot of people, it extends to what we were just discussing, where, to be outspoken is a essential part of being authentic for me, right? For some people, being an outspoken person isn't their natural authentic self. So it becomes, it becomes an exercise in broadening the concept of what it means to be outspoken beyond just the literal use of your speech. Some people are just not good public speakers. Some people are just not confident in thinking quickly, right? Because the other thing is, when you say it, you better have something behind it, because you're going to be challenged and you need to have a continued response, right? And so there's ways in which you can be outspoken that aren't necessarily about using your physical voice, that I think a lot of us have to explore, and that have to be considered still resonant options, whether it's using your money, whether it's using your pen, whether it's using your power as someone who is in hiring. You can be outspoken in your actions. And there is a saying that we've all heard: actions speak louder than words. So oftentimes it's really just exploring, like, what are the actions I can do that speak for me when I don't feel confident speaking for myself? And for me, my voice is that action. That's how it landed for me. I've had 2 situations in particular, when I first moved to Los Angeles and I was auditioning, I was like really trying to find my way, and everyone kept telling me, like, Amanda, you're in LA now, so you can't be outspoken. I know that you're a New Yorker, but you can't be outspoken in LA because people in LA, they don't like that. And so I'm like, okay. And, in the back of my head, I'm like, I don't know how that's going to work. But, sometimes I'm just like, you know what? It's not about It's not about changing. It's just about finding a new way to be real. Okay. So you don't got to like be a different person. You just got to expand the person you are. But I would find myself in scenarios where I really wanted to say something, but I just felt like, this might shoot me in my foot. And, the goal of advancing in a town that's based on opportunism and greed, et cetera, starts to shift your mindset in terms of how you make choices around what you are spoken about. And I got an audition for a TV show where the character was described as a college graduate and as somebody who was a very smart, snappy sister who was on point. And she was the assistant to this young woman who was hapless and, not really on her P's and Q's. But then when you read the script, the writing did not reflect the way that she was described. And it really presented her in a very stereotypical and reductive fashion. And I was just livid because I knew that this had been written by somebody who just had this kind of idea of what a Black person was, but didn't feel the need to bring authenticity into the room to authenticate the role and make it actually be grounded in something true. And I was livid. Heather, I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm about to do my own version of Hollywood Shuffle. This is crazy. And my agent was like, I hear you, but I still want you to meet this casting director. And you're just like, So I had to figure out what my happy medium was. And I decided, you know what? I'm just going to play the role the way I want to. I'm not going to pay attention to this. I'm going to play the role the way I want to. So I get in the audition and I do the audition, and the casting director I remember he was sitting like this. And he just stared at me, and I stared back, and he stared at me, and I stared back, and he positioned himself. And finally he was like, you played that different. You played it different than it was on the paper. And in that moment, I'm like, it's the day for revolution. I think today might be the day for revolution. And
every day is the day for evolution.
I just said, screw it. And I was like, yeah, because it was racist. And he erupted. He was like, oh my God, thank you. Somebody said it. Somebody said it. He turned to his assistant who was videotaping, and he's like, Alicia, did I not say that? He said it. He did say it. He did. Thank you, Alicia. And it ended up being a great open conversation where he was like, I told them that these things, the breakdown doesn't align. I told them that the lines were very, offensive. And I explained this to them and they did not get it. He was like, I'm so happy to hear this. You know what? Let me get you a call back. So that was my first callback. My first callback happened at the time I chose to actually just be my authentic self, not be, not stomach the injustice that I feel like I'm watching, even though it's a small, it's not injustice at the hands that we have seen, but it still felt just like something I need to speak to. So that was one of those times where I was just very proud of myself for making the choice to be myself. And I always say, there's no use for politeness that gets in the way of progress. And I think, the corporate world is built on that. The corporate world is built on passive aggression as a synonym for professionalism. And it gets misnomered as courtesy. It gets misnomered as consideration to simply just be dishonest and not transparent for the sake of lack of confrontation. And I think we have to understand that confronting things is not about hostility. Confronting things is about bravery. And when we confront each other in ways that have respect and have consideration and compassion, we get so much further in our communication. And I've really worked on bringing those things up, in higher levels in my conversations so that we can confront issues that need to be discussed in ways where solution can be found.
And that casting director was waiting for someone to say it, and how many times do all of us in a situation where we see the obvious thing, but we're trying to be polite or we feel like we can't be our authentic selves. But once you are and you say it, there's 9 times out of 10 for me, there's somebody who's like, gosh, I was waiting for somebody to say that. I was thinking it too.
No one wants to look bad. No one wants to look bad. And I think a lot of people don't know who their authentic self is. And I think and then the other flip of it is people do know who their authentic self is and they're afraid of it. They're afraid of that authentic self and what that could mean for them. And there's a lot of Black folks that are on this Zoom right now who are in jobs where they are not, they don't feel comfortable to be their authentic self, because the space of the corporate world oftentimes makes you feel like, whether you are just BIPOC in general, that your ethnicity is in the way of making everyone feel comfortable enough to do the job. And so you go to work and you tuck it in, and it's exhausting. And there's a reason why, Black people in America have the highest rate of heart disease. And I believe it's not just because of diet. I believe it's also because of stress.
And Black women have even higher rates.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And there is it's more than important. There's just a vital role that people in boardrooms who are not of color play in supporting and creating platforms for everyone's voices to have validity, and doing that not just with their voice, but with their actions.
I agree. And it's what you came back to the beginning. I use the term voice, that we're all trying to find our voice. And you've had an amazing voice, but even people that aren't comfortable using their quote unquote voice for speaking up or public speaking, they have a voice in so many other ways. Their actions, the hiring, just how there's so many ways that you can have a voice. And I think
in a boardroom, you hear, how many times have you been in a room and seen someone say something and have it be ignored, and then the next person who is considered to be, of a higher rank in social standing says the same thing and it's applauded, and then no one says anything, and that and that person feels like, well, I'm not going to share my ideas anymore. And what you've just done in that moment is you've diminished the efficiency of your company, because you just silenced an asset.
And so it's so many times in my career, too many times to even count, has that been the case? And the advice that I always give to folks is you have to speak up, for not just for yourself to be, if you're the different, but you have to speak up for the person that wasn't heard. You have to say, wait, I think so-and-so was trying to say something, or so-and-so just said that, and because I don't think people recognize it. And so I kind of had a New Year's resolution a couple of years ago that I'm just going to speak up. And you know what, if people get annoyed, they get annoyed. But I'm every time I see that, I'm going to say something. Every time I see someone have unconscious bias, I'm going to say something. And I have, and it hasn't always been the easiest conversations, but 9 times out of 10, people are pretty open to it and they don't realize it.
Well, and that's also like using your privilege as power, and understanding that, privilege is real. And so many times people want to run from it as like, oh, you're trying to say that I don't have a difficult life. And it's like, no, that's not what we're saying at all. It's just saying that you have this other power over here that you may not know that you can tap into, but that absolutely is tapping into you. And that when you exercise it and when you turn it on, you can do so much good with it. And that good makes you feel good. And that at the end of the day, even if you're the most selfish person ever, it's like, ride that wave.
Yep.
Ride that.
So appreciate your voice in so many levels, and appreciate your advice. I want to ask one last question. I know we're out of time, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because this has just been an awesome conversation. So you talked in the last panel about hope and, the Avengers with the Thanos rings. As a mother of 3 sons, like that so resonated for me because I've seen those movies way too many times. Love them though. But what, from a hope perspective for you, like if you and I get together 10 years from now, and what would you hope that you would tell me had gone on in the world since 2020? Like, what do you hope for? What do you think the next 10 years the next decade could look like for us?
What it could look like.
What you hope for.
What I hope for.
What you hope for.
I mean, I hope that, I hope for a revolution. I hope for a revolution on a number of fronts. I hope for a real concerted, like, countrywide effort to reimagining what it means to be American.
I agree.
I know that this country was founded on ideals and values that if I'm sharing the same hopefulness as Chad, that many people do not align with. This country was founded on, on slavery, and on the right to have slaves. And a lot of people don't want to accept that. They think this country was founded on the idea of independence. And yes, it was the independence to have slaves because Britain was ending slavery, and America was like, well, we still would like to keep this thing popping. And so I think that in order for us to have that revolution, it comes down to reimagining our identities as individuals and as a nation. And doing that, I think, is not an easy feat, because for what it's worth, a lot of people align themselves with America based on a history that is simply just false, that wasn't taught properly, So when I look at the next 10 years, I hope that we start to move in that direction, in a direction towards reconsidering, just literally reconsidering. Like, we've had different eras in this country. We've had Reconstruction. We've had, slavery. We've had the Depression, the Great Depression. Industrial Revolution. And I would love us to have the Great Reconsideration.
I love it.
Where there's a nationwide, concerted effort to say, well, what does making America great for the first time look like? What does that look like? And that would be my ideal.
I wholeheartedly agree. Wholeheartedly. And I would love for, after, the Industrial Revolution and the information age, that this is the age of not just reconsidering, but enlightenment, that we reconsider in a better way. And I have hope too. But I think it's going to take a lot of work, and we're at the very, very beginning. And I think this last year is showing the sparks that we're ready for that people are coming together and they are speaking up. And so I have hope that we'll continue for people to speak their truth and have their voices heard, and it hopefully will make a change. And I agree with you. We need to all vote.
We got to all vote. We got to do it. We got to do it. Even if it feels perfunctory, it's like, let's just test the system out and see.
All right. On that note, I think we are ready to go into our breakouts. So if everyone can join the breakouts, we have some amazing content and speakers in the breakouts, and look forward to seeing all of you in the different breakout sessions. And Amanda will bring you back later after the breakouts. And thank you, Amanda, for this amazing conversation. I feel like I gotta have a kindred soul here. So this was awesome.
Yeah. Appreciate you.
Thanks.